Hi, welcome to Salon Undone. I always believe in starting on time, and we are starting exactly on time. I'm Meryl Natchez, and I want to start off by thanking everyone who participated in putting this event together, either by letting me use their work or creating something specifically for this event. And especially the Mill Valley Library, its director, Angie Brenner, who makes our events possible, and Franklin Walther, who manages the increasingly complex tech. And I also need to thank Marin Poetry Center, which is where all these events take shape. If you aren't already a member of Marin Poetry Center, please think about joining. It's member dues that enable us to produce these events and to have a wonderful poetry community. You don't have to live in Marin to be a member. In fact, we have many East Bay and San Francisco and actually members in Europe and all over the country. I can't actually see any of you or what you write at the moment, but the man behind the curtain, Franklin Walther, has asked me to tell you to put your questions in Q&A, and to answer any questions at the end because he's pretty insanely busy switching out all the images and videos for this event. So if you can save your questions to the end, that would kind of help because that way I can focus on them then. So I know we're all dealing with a lot of stress right now. Today is the 19th anniversary of 9/11. We're all dealing with the fires and the smoke and just the terrible devastation from the fires. But for the next 40 minutes, I hope that we can just experience the pleasure of connection with art, music, and poetry. I want to take you on a short journey through the way one event leads to another, the unpredictable way inspiration arises. For many years, some friends and I have hosted salons at my house, and artists, writers, musicians come together for an evening to share their work and eat and talk and be inspired. We created that kind of connection. One of us is a letterpress printer who printed these invitations. And this June, Longship Press published my book of poems, Catwalk. If this were a normal world, I would have read a few poems from it at one of our salons, surrounded by others who were performing or showing their work, perfumers and fabric designers and artists and writers, memoirists and poets, but of course this isn't possible. And so instead, I began to envision what has become this event, Salon Undone. And I hope it will mimic the connection and inspiration of a live salon, and that it can embody the kind of community that fosters creativity. There's so many different and unexpected influences that go into what becomes a book or a work of art. And like the physical salon, everyone who appears here tonight, some of whom were on the banner that advertised this and some who aren't, but everyone is connected to me in some way. They've all either influenced my work or helped me with my work. And by showing their work, I hope to give you a sense of the kind of artistic community we're all missing so much right now. Some of them you may know, like Forrest Gander and Jericho Brown, who are consecutive Pulitzer Prize winners, but some you will certainly never have heard of. So the next 40 minutes or so should be a journey into the artistic process, starting with a very informal clip of Marquis, Engle, and I singing around.
I'm a tower of strength with... Yes! All right, now that that's finished.
All right.
I'm a tower of strength within and without. I'm a tower of strength within.
Love it.
I'm a tower of strength within and without. I'm a tower of strength within. I
I'm a
let
tower of
all
strength
burdens fall
within
from
and
my
without.
shoulders,
I'm a
all
tower of strength
anxiety slip from
within.
my mind. I let
I'm a tower of
all
strength
burdens fall
within
from
and
my
without.
shoulders,
Tower
all
of strength
anxiety slip from my
within.
mind. I
I
let
let
every
all
shackles be
burdens
loose.
fall from my
I
shoulders.
let
Let all
every shackle
anxiety
be
slip
loose.
from my mind. I
I
let
let every
all
shackle be
burdens fall
loose.
from my
I
shoulders. Let
let
all
every shackle
anxiety
be
slip
loosed.
from my mind. I let
I'm a tower
every
of strength
shackle be
within and without.
loose. I let
I'm a tower
every
of strength
shackle be loose.
within.
I let
I'm a tower
every
of strength
shackle be
within and without.
loose.
I'm a tower of
Every
strength
shackle be
within.
loose.
I
Let
let
every
every shackle
shackle
be
be
loose.
loose. I
I let
let
every
every
shackle
shackle
be
be
loose.
loose.
So I don't know exactly what you're seeing, but if when the clips come out, you put us on speaker view, you get a fuller picture of the clip, I think. But anyway, I hope you can sense Marquis's wonderful energy from that. He is the director of youth programs at the Booker T. Washington Community Service Center in San Francisco, working with underserved kids in the inner city, which is a perfect job for him. But when I met him, he was just a guy standing in line at Starbucks. It was a really magical afternoon a year ago in March. And the way I met him illustrates both the unexpected reach of community and how it can affect what we create. It started off at a board meeting of Marin Poetry Center that winter. At the end of our board meetings, we each read a poem, and Amanda Moore, who will be taking over events for me this month, read a poem she called A Duplex. And when I asked her what that was, she referred me to an essay by Jericho Brown. He basically cut up his old work into lines of 9 and 11 syllables and made them into intricately rhyming sonnets he called duplexes. Here's Jericho reading one he told me I could use from his book, The Tradition, which this year won the Pulitzer Prize.
I begin with love, hoping to end there. I don't want to leave a messy corpse. I don't want to leave a messy corpse full of medicines that turn in the sun. Some of my medicines turn in the sun. Some of us don't need hell to be good. Those who need most need hell to be good. What are the symptoms of your sickness? Here is one symptom of my sickness. Men who love me are men who miss me. Men who leave me are men who miss me in the dream where I am an island. In the dream where I am an island, I grow green with hope. I'd like to end there.
So I don't know if you find that as captivating as I did, but I read that essay and I read some of these sonnets and I immediately wanted to try this because if you have a writing practice that's fairly daily and you write for many years, you have a lot of bad poems, and I mean hundreds of them. And some of these poems I've worked on for years, for multiple drafts, long periods of time, and they just never made it. So taking a scissors and physically cutting into them and to retrieve the few lines that I really liked was such a visceral thrill. And soon I had heaps of lines, and I initially put them into a pottery dish that the fascinating sculptor Ashwini Bhatt had given me. And you can't actually really see from this photo so much, but the dish has this amazing coppery sheen that is really magical. And it also has a heft to it. And so I kept cutting these lines into the dish, and they soon overflowed the dish. So even though I always cut them into the dish because I believe it absorbs a little of the dish's magic, I began transferring them to sheets that an artist friend told me about of sort of reverse sticky tabs. It's just like a sticky tab that you put in a book, except the whole surface is sticky and you can put things on them and move them around. And at the moment, my office wall has several of these up. And the little one is the one I use to sort of assemble them into sonnets. Now, Jericho's rules are really rigorous, too rigorous for me. Mine are looser. So I called my sonnets loose plex. And each section of my book now starts with a loose plex. They sort of tie the book together. And I thought I'd read one to you. It's called Despite Everything, Spring. No one was watching. We searched the silence like a farmer in drought, ears open for rain. Each morning, each evening, scatter of yellow. Whatever else is here, it's spring, a framework for the rags of this world. Real joy mixed with a certain uncertainty. Overnight, a fuzz of tender green. It glints and shimmers. It pulls me toward it. Strong carpet of newborn shoots under last year's weeds. 5 billion miles away, a galaxy dies. Aretha's hat, Yo-Yo Ma's delight. Is this our work, to love what is here? To move along the skin of this earth, married like enamel to the tooth. So for me, I mean, I don't know how much of this really comes through, but a little bit of the poems that these came from kind of hovers around these lines for me. And anyway, it's fun for me. And for some reason, almost all of them seem to have a question in them. I guess I have a lot of questions in my work, in my life. But anyway, this brings me back to how I met Marquis. Because I was so involved in his process when I heard Jericho was coming to Berkeley to read for the UC Lunch Poem Series, I immediately got in touch with him to see if we could have him read that evening for our Marin Poetry Center Bridges to Poetry series in San Francisco, and he agreed. And I wound up spending the afternoon with him in San Francisco between the lunch poems and the reading in San Francisco. And it was one of those really rare, God, I can't even remember one, magical, sunny, clear days. And we walked along the Embarcadero talking about his form and what I was doing with it and what other people were doing with it and how new forms arise and all things poetic and non-poetic. We stopped for coffee at Starbucks and Marquis was ahead of us in line, and he and Jericho immediately started talking. Marquis wound up coming to the poetry reading that evening and then to the dinner afterward. And so Jericho went back to Georgia, but Marquis is here and became a friend. We both love to cook and to sing. And when I asked if he'd sing with me for this, he didn't hesitate. And so these connections intertwined. The next piece I want to show you is a little more remote, but by someone you've probably heard of, the artist Ruth Asawa. This is from the Michael Rosenfeld Gallery that generously allowed me to show some of their diverse collection. I found out about this gallery because my granddaughter went to school with the gallerist's daughter. And I used to visit their gallery in New York, and I got on their mailing list. And for 10 years or so, I've been receiving their mailers, which are works of art in themselves. I can't really afford most of the art, but I can enjoy the mailers. And I love this piece by Ruth Asawa, partly because of the way it seems to embody creativity, one thing growing around another. When I read her bio, I learned that she and her family had been interned during World War II, and her life was really seriously disrupted. Oh, you can read more about that and anybody else who appears here in the document that is, I think, in the chat or somewhere available to you. It's also available from the Marin Poetry website events page. But anyway, that was a very dark period, another dark period, I guess, of our history. It's pretty dark right now. And I think it's reflected in the intricate cage-like structure of so many of her pieces. But I also love that her pieces have a real birth-like quality to them, the way something seems to be growing inside something else. Which brings me to Ellen Bass. When I read her wonderful new book, Indigo, I realized we had both written poems about our home birth experiences. And so we met a couple of weeks ago by Zoom to talk about this and to read our poems. I was hoping that we could read each other our birth poems because we both had the experience of having children at home or trying to have children at home, which was pretty common in California in the 70s, if not required.
Yeah. And so different now.
Yeah, all of my children have had their children in the hospital. which has been hard for me, actually.
My daughter-in-law is pregnant now.
Oh, yeah.
She's
Congratulations.
going to get a grandchild, a little girl, and in February. And it's very interesting to watch her decisions and process, which are completely in line with other young people her age.
Yeah.
And of course, she's going to have her baby in a hospital. And yes, my daughter was born in 1978, and also our son was born in 1987, and he was born at home. So there was a window in there.
Yeah, there was. My children were born between 1970 and 1976, all four of them at home. The first one in Spain in what my mother called a creche. So do you want to go first? I'd love to. Yours wasn't such a wonderful experience.
No, it was definitely not. No, the emotional tenor of our experiences is extremely different, but we were in the same era, and some of the things that are in our poems are of that time, and so we'll see what they are. Maybe I'll even mention before I read in here that I mentioned the diapers and the sleeper that are in a brown paper bag that I baked in the oven. And this is something that maybe not everyone knows about, but if you're having a home birth, you want to sterilize these things. And the way that you do that is to put them in a paper bag and bake them. I don't remember at what temperature or for how long, so look it up in case you plan on doing this. But that's why they're in the bag and stapled. Okay. Because the night I gave birth, my husband went blind. Hysterical, I guess you'd call it. Because there'd been too many people, and then there was no one. Only this small creature, her tiny cry, no bigger than a sequin. Because I'd been pushing too many hours, even with her soft skull plates shifting, the color of my bones too slender. When I reached down, I could feel the wet wisps of hair of this being living inside me, but her heart was weakening. The midwife told me not to push on the way to the hospital, but I pushed anyway. This was California in the 70s, and I'd have pushed until I died. The doctor asked for permission to cut my perineum. So polite, as though he were requesting the pleasure of the next dance. Then he slid in forceps skillfully, not a scratch on her temples. But we left that haven the same night because my husband didn't believe in hospitals. The baby naked, wrapped only in a blanket, because we both believed in skin to skin. Because the baby cried but wouldn't suck. Because when I started to stand, I started to faint. So I had to crawl to the sterile diapers and pale yellow sleeper folded inside the brown paper bag I'd baked in the oven. Because I'm still there, on my hands and knees, deflated belly and ripe breasts, huge dark nipples, tearing open the stapled bag, fumbling the ducky pins. 2 fingers slipped between the baby's belly and the thick layers of cotton, the sharp point. The baby, a stranger, yet so strangely familiar. Flecks of blood still stuck to her scalp. Because my husband slept beside me and I let him sleep. Because it would be years before I left him. Now, love and grief would be greater than I ever imagined. Rooted together like north and south, over and under. Because I too had been pushed out into another world. I lay there with the baby whimpering in my arms, both of us wide awake in the darkness.
I love that poem. I think that little sequin, I love the sequin and the ducky pins and all those tiny details that make it so vivid. It's just so beautiful and so moving. And
Thank you.
it captures, birth is a very raw thing, It's frightening. It's has its own momentum, and you captured that too. So my experience is a little different, and we didn't have a midwife for this baby. The first baby was born in Spain. We had a midwife. Then we came back to California, and there was no midwife to be had at that time. We were living in the Jackson State Forest in a plastic A-frame without running water or electricity, little wood stove, and kerosene lanterns. So this is called the handbook. And my book said to wrap the things in newspaper. That newspaper had some special qualities to sterilize things. I don't know. Anyway, so that's what I did, not paperback. Other than that, the handbook. I wonder how many of us, long hair parted in the middle, pored over the Chinese barefoot doctor's manual by the light of a kerosene lantern, hoping it was accurate, as we assembled a package of blankets, twine, cloth diapers and pins, sleeper, boiled scissors, wrapped it in newspaper, tied it, baked it, and set it on the high shelf as we waited for the unpredictable journey. Everything we did then needed a handbook. So when the head appeared after more pain than I had been led to expect, and Larry rotated first one shoulder, then the other, and the scrawny body popped into his arms just as the handbook said, with an alien beauty it hadn't described. Is it a surprise that we thought we were changing the world, or a surprise that the world pushed back and changed us?
Oh, I love that alien beauty. What a perfect phrase to describe seeing that baby.
Thank you. Yeah, they're strange creatures from another planet. So that was Ellen reading from her book Indigo, and I was reading from Catwalk. Both came out this year. I've put links to them in the chat and in the Google Doc. I think it's a Google Doc. I created a Google Doc anyway. I don't know what form it's in now. And I also put in a list of other people who I happen to know have new books that came out in this period, and hope that one of them might catch your fancy. The reason that my first child was born in a structure in an olive in Andalusia that had formerly housed a family of pigs is kind of complicated, and I'm not going to get into that. But we ended up in that specific little community, Morón de la Frontera, because of a cult figure, a guitarist we had heard about named Diego de Gastor. And Diego was part of the gypsy community. They were living very quiet lives in Franco's Spain, keeping their heads down, making a living through menial jobs like selling combs at the marketplace, and the occasional fiesta where foreigners paid to hear them. This community was so extraordinary and warm, and they had a kind of authenticity that was the main thing that we were searching for at that time. It's almost as hard to describe that ambiance as it is to describe that period. But Diego would just come to the bar every day and sit around practicing with his guitar, and a bunch of guys would be there talking and arguing and drinking and playing cards. And Diego would be practicing, and all of a sudden he'd hit on something wonderful and go, and the crowd they'd stop talking and they'd quiet down, and everybody would listen. And sometimes one of the men would take his shirt out and kind of dance around and sing. It was quite extraordinary. You can see a little bit of that here. This is a more formal fiesta, but I think you can get the feeling, and you can certainly see, even from this short clip, how extraordinary Diego was. So that's a little bit of Diego del Gastor. One thing about Diego is for a while we lived across the hall from him in this little building, and I would say something to him, and he would say to his niece Maria, "¿Qué dice?" And Maria would say, "Exactly. I thought exactly what I said," but he never could understand me because my accent, I guess, just wasn't Andalusian enough. Anyway, that world doesn't exist anymore. It died with the old guard, and I feel like the world is diminished with its passing, but that kind of delight, that kind of really nonverbal delight, I think is present in the work of the artist Betye Saar. Here's a picture of her. She's 94 at the moment. God, don't you hope you look like that at 94? I sure do. She was born in LA. She raised 3 daughters, and she has created these increasingly complex and mystical assemblages as she developed as an artist. And these totemic images seem so close to the mystical heart of things. This one I'm going to show you is called Dr. Dambala Juju, and she created it after a trip to Africa. This is also, all the art that I'm showing is from the Michael Rosenfeld Gallery. If you want to get on their mailing list, it's really, they have amazing shows, and they focus on artists of color. So that's kind of a cool thing about them. But her work really moves me on a non-verbal level. She credits Joseph Cornell as an inspiration for these assemblages. And I love this quote of hers, which is, "It may not be possible to convey to someone else the mysterious, transforming gifts by which dreams, memory, and experience become art. But I like to think that I can try." And I'm kind of trying to do that here too, I think. And the cat is joining us, so he's a mystical being. Anyway, another sculpture from the same gallery is by Marion Perkins, and this is also modeled after an African figure. Perkins was another self-taught artist, and he mostly got instruction. Once he ran a newsstand and would use discarded materials to sculpt, and someone noticed his work and gave him an introduction to Cy Gordon, and he studied with him at the local Black YMCA. But I think both these sculptures capture a kind of reality that lives alongside the everyday, that's real and compelling. I often feel that we neglect this side of ourselves. We kind of pretend we're in control, and there's so much unknowable in the way our lives unfold. I have an altar in my house with photos of my beloved dead, like is in this spirit. It's right by the front door of my house, and it's the first thing you see as you enter. And I wrote this poem about it called Another Morning on Earth. On the altar in the living room, pictures of my parents, my brother at 40, Larry's parents, my mother and her sisters on the Atlantic City boardwalk in the 30s, and Erwin, my mother's last love, for the besotted, lively gaze she turns on him, though I try to keep him behind the flowers. Perhaps they watch me, even watch over me. When I fell and it was just bad enough to put up railings and walk more carefully, I felt they had given me a warning. Or when the baby is here, or when we gather an ordinary morning, newspaper or book or laptop, the ramekin of salt on the table, there they are, watching. I change the flowers as they wilt, alströmerias, anemones, the last sweet peas, because I want my dead to keep on watching out for us, for the children and grandchildren and beloved friends in this chancy world, where death lurks on the landing or in the car, or microbes or snipers or breast or bone or stomach. What do they think about the time I waste? Such an abundance that I throw whole hours into online Scrabble or threes, because it's hard to be here now being a confused elixir of sun and fog and email and bird shadow and superstition and chicken feed and toast and news and insatiable longing, and I have to pee. A fusillade of random moments that can converge into a ravishing pattern, which I have from time to time and briefly glimpsed. But mostly, I wander the planet with blinders on, going somewhere fast. I like to keep moving. I like my time full. And I like to believe that because their photos out from their niche in the living room, they are present. And if I keep a fresh parade of flowers on the altar, they will keep on keeping me from harm. So I created this altar about a decade ago, inspired really by Dia de los Muertos, and also thinking about how Lucille Clifton, that wonderful poet who I studied with at the Community of Writers, used to say she felt her mother's presence as a reality in her life. I can't say that in my life with her certainty, but I do hope that my beloved dead watch over me. It's a deep comfort, and I don't think anyone really knows, so why not? And maybe I need them to watch out for me because I'm by nature a risk taker. And one of the scariest things I've done in recent years was to take up jazz singing. And I think you can tell from the round with Marquis that I am really not a singer, certainly not a professional singer. But I met Molly Holm through a workshop she did with the great roots singer in Berkeley, Linda Tillery. I got a flyer and I had enjoyed a gospel workshop with Linda Tillery. And so why not? I went to this jazz singing workshop. When I got there were about 25 people and we were each handed this sheet music for a Bill Evans song called The Universe in You. If you know anything about jazz, Bill Evans is a really complicated, chromatic composer. And this piece was so far beyond my abilities. And then everyone went around in the circle and took a turn scatting. I was about 2 people from the end of the circle. And I figured when it was my turn, I'd just pass because I had never scattered in my life. I had no idea what to do. But by the time it came to me, it felt like it'd be worse to pass, to say I couldn't do it than to just do something. And I did, God only knows what I did. But despite the fact that I had no idea what I was doing, I kind of fell in love with Molly's voice. And I wound up taking her jazz singing class on Wednesday nights for many years. It included exercises, improv, singing jazz standards, and it just made me happy. We used to meet in St. John's Church in Berkeley, and one night we had turned off the lights and we were making animal sounds like cats and meow and screeches, and the choir director came in and said, "This is not music." But I think it is kind of music. And one of the great delights of that class was just hearing Molly's voice. She's going to sing tonight, one of my favorite, Here's That Rainy Day, music by Jimmy Van Heusen, lyrics by Johnny Burke. And I know from my own experience, this song has really tricky intervals, but she makes it sound so easy. Take it away, Molly.
Maybe I should have saved those leftover dreams. Funny, but here's that rainy day. Here's that rainy day they told me about. And I laughed at the thought that it might turn out this way. Where is that worn out wish that I threw aside after it brought my lover near? Funny how love becomes a cold, rainy day. Funny that rainy day is here. Ba-do-dee, ba-do-ba-do-ba-be-dee-ah. that worn out wish that I threw aside after it brought my lover near. Funny how love becomes a cold, rainy day. Funny that rainy day is here. Happy book launch, Meryl.
So I realized I didn't tell you what scatting is, but now you know. Molly has a CD called Permission. It's listed in the chat also, and there's some terrific songs on it. And in addition to being a wonderful performer, Molly's the kind of teacher who really makes you believe you can do better. She is always bringing you up a level, even when you feel like what you're doing is completely and totally embarrassing. She makes you feel embarrassed. She's always encouraging you. And I've often regretted that I never had that kind of poetry teacher. I really missed out in that way, but I have had the good to have found a poetry home in the Community of Writers summer workshop. So many wonderful encounters and memories from my time there. And this is where I first met the poet and translator Forrest Gander, whose amazing book, Be With, won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize. And I am going to show you this adorable video of his poem to Alexander Calder called Disparity 2.
Disparity 2 for Alexander Calder. They're lying who say they don't remember the shock of seeing vertical foliage explode into this flock of blackbirds flying perfectly in place. In his later years, he taught a black minotaur to walk as along a tightrope, the S-curve of its back poised like a snake on its coil above those lickable laminose thighs, its great noir head disguised as an exfoliation of leaves or eyes.
God, those lickable laminose thighs. It's an image that is so uniquely Forrest. The lushness and the surprise of his work is such an inspiration. And also, this is the first time I ever saw the words of a poem scrolling down the poem as the poet reads. And I could never imitate Forrest's work, the leaps that his poems make. And I certainly can't hang upside down anymore, but I could copy that idea of words scrolling down the page. So this next poem is one I wrote after that landing of the plane in the Hudson River where Sully glided into a perfect stop about 10 years ago. And the words scroll down, as you'll see.
After. At first, to be alive is all you need. The sweet bitterness of coffee, the hand with the umbrella, the blanket's warmth as you step from the wing of the plane, afloat on icy water, onto the deck of the rescue boat. Even the air's acrid sting on the skin of your cheeks is welcome. But soon, you begin to miss your laptop, your keys, the numbers stored in your phone. This is the daily wonder, to take life for granted each time it's restored to you.
So I have to admit, I actually didn't do the scrolling. Maxine Flasher does Guns, who is an intern from Rin Poetry Center, did that for me. But I want to finish the body of this presentation on a lighter note with the appearance of the wonderful Karnak the Magnificent. Some of you may remember this character that Johnny Carson played for years. He would come on stage in his crazy turban and his cape and hold an envelope up to his turban and give an answer and then hand the envelope to Ed McMahon, who'd rip open the envelope and read the question. So here we go, Karnak the Magnificent.
Karnak the Magnificent. Back when marriage was for keeps, my mother-in-law watched Johnny every night. He came on at 11, flickering his monologue onto the desolate late-night airwaves as Mabel sat quilting in her empty living room. Not much happened in her day, or was likely in the next. Her grown son set against fulfilling his promise. Her husband wheelchaired for life. But Johnny made her laugh. His shy Midwestern corn, his string of ruinous marriages, the zany turban and outrageous animals. One time she knit and sent a red acrylic crotch cozy, plumped with tissue paper, an exercise requiring some imagination as to the size and shape of his unmentionables. I wonder how many of those he got from women, knitting by the light of the TV in Omaha or Wichita or Bend. She never heard back.
So that poem is mine from Catwalk. The recording is my friend Sunil, and it came to me as a gift. I'd been talking with his wife about how hard it is to release a book in the pandemic, and without telling me, she bought the book and had her husband read a few of his favorite poems and record them. And she sent me the recording as a surprise, which is another gift that enriched this period. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. I see there's a couple of questions. I am not going to type out the song lyrics here, but if you email me, I will be happy to send them to you. I don't think I included them, and I included everything I could think of in that doc, but I don't think I included those. So meryl.natchez@gmail.com. And the gallery name is both in the chat and in the doc. It's the Michael Rosenfeld Gallery in New York. I don't know about reading one more poem, Sean. It's very sweet of you to ask, but I'm not a big fan of just reading poems into the air. I think if people want one more poem, they're going to have to buy the book. But I do have a little surprise for the end of this, if there are not any more questions. I went for Labor Day weekend. We drove down to LA to visit my daughter and grandson, who is 8. And my grandson made a movie of him playing electric guitar to his favorite Metallica song. And maybe we'll go out with that. And so Sean, that should at least make your husband happy, because I know he likes that kind of music. And I mean, I'm not a big fan of Metallica, but I just thought, like, here's an 8-year-old making a movie way beyond anything I could do. So thank you so much for coming to this event. I had a great time, and it was wonderful to be able to show you a few of the things that have been so meaningful to me in this period. So I think we have reached the end of our salon. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Take care.